Preservation Perspectives, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation podcast. I'm your host, Luke Nichter. February is Black History Month, and a name most everyone knows is Harriet Tubman, the famed conductor of the Underground Railroad, a network of routes and volunteers that helped to free enslaved people both before and during the Civil War. There are many historic sites associated with Tubman, but today we are focusing on Maryland's Eastern Shore, where she grew up and first rescued family members, now commemorated through the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Historic Park. We are very pleased today to have with us park guide Lawson Nwakudo. Welcome, Lawson.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Let's start with a few basic details, personal details. Could you tell us a little bit about your own background and how did you decide to become a park ranger?
That's a really interesting question. So I'm from the Eastern Shore here in Maryland. I grew up in West Ocean City, Cape Isles of Wight, and also Cambridge, Maryland, which is about 20 minutes away from the park. Uh, my background is in biology. That's what I went to college for. But sometime during my third year of college, my best friend, he got a job at the park as a seasonal state park ranger. This park, I mean, the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad State Park. And he he was just kept on asking me, "Hey, you should apply. You should apply. I think you really enjoy this." And I acquiesced eventually. And I just I worked here for one season, and I absolutely loved it. It took one season to decide, you know what, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to deal with the hard sciences for a living. I want to deal with history. I want to deal with interpretation. And that happened in 2018. I worked as a seasonal here at the park for about 3 years, and I got this permanent position with the National Park Service in 2020. And the rest is history. Here I am.
I can certainly commiserate with someone who avoided the sciences for their career. Some of our viewers are very passionate followers of national historic park sites. And however, this was one of the newer ones in the system. I guess tell us a little bit about the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Historic Park, and for visitors or prospective visitors, what is there to see and do?
Absolutely. So this park was established in 2017. That's when we opened up on March 10th. And it's an interesting park in the fact that it's a national and state park at the same time. It's a partnership park. So funny enough, when I got this job with the National Park Service, worked in the same place, just changed uniforms. Um, but we have a very interesting cooperative agreement here at the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Historical Park. We work day in and day out with our state park compatriots. We have legislation that allows us to work together and share resources, and that has helped out immensely with some of our larger programs. And we try to help our state compatriots whenever we can. The park itself, it's a 17-acre park. It's relatively small, and there's 3 buildings on it. We have the Visitor Center, which is the building I'm in right now currently. There's our administrative building, and that's the most boring building on site. That's what I like to tell people. And then our picnic pavilion. And there's really a myriad of things that you can do here if you visit the park, especially now during Black History Month. During the weekends, we have the multipurpose room open um, for a program that we call Games of Enslaved Children, where we teach people about the different games that enslaved African Americans um, during the 18 and 1700s played, and how they use these games to sort of cope with the actuality of the lives they lived. We also have ranger-led programs every week, and of course, we have the exhibit hall itself, where that's really the star of the visitor center. That's where everyone goes to learn about Harriet Tubman's life and legacy in chronological order. Um, so the So there's a lot to do inside, and we also have things outside as well. A half-mile walking trail through our legacy garden, where you'll learn a little bit about the symbolism in Harriet Tubman's story, and that's built into this park.
Quite a um, quite a really diverse site out there for those who've not seen it. And that leads to a follow-up. Normally this is a podcast focused on historic preservation in some form, and normally the historic site we're talking about is a building, and we think of historic sites normally as being buildings, but in your case, it's a little different. So what is different about the park, and how does that make it special?
That is an excellent question. So this park is different, and like you mentioned, most people think about buildings, but the fact of the matter is that when it comes to a lot of things that have to deal with African American history, there are very few buildings and structures still in existence from the 19th century, and that's just an unfortunate reality of a lot of interpreters and historians that interpret that sort of history. Um, so we don't have an old farmstead or home that Harriet Tubman's siblings or parents would have owned. We don't have anything like that, but what we do have is the landscape. And the thing that's really special about the landscape here is that it is so very similar to what it looked like when Harriet Tubman was around. Um, the great thing about this area is that we're surrounded on all sides by the Blackwater Wildlife Refuge, and they have preserved this area. They made sure that this area wasn't built up economically in the sense that you won't see Walmarts or Targets or anything like that back here. So when you drive here, it's wide open country. You can see farmland, you can see trees, and a lot of these farms are in the same places, growing the same crops that they were growing when Harriet Tubman was around. And we like to tell our visitors that if Harriet Tubman were to come to the park right now, she'd be able to easily and confidently navigate herself from Bucktown to Madison to Cambridge, using these physical landmarkers that she would have recognized 200 years ago. So that's really our strength here. We turn what it would be a weakness into a strength, where we use the landscape to interpret Harriet Tubman's life and legacy. And so much of the landscape has directly impacted Harriet Tubman's life and the lives of free and enslaved African Americans in the Eastern Shore.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I was thinking while you were talking, to me, Harriet Tubman is one of those names that I would imagine a very high percentage of Americans have heard before. I probably fewer Americans could actually provide details, about her life, but certainly very high name recognition of her name. So in terms of filling out some of those details, for this next, I teach college students, and a lot of times I'm surprised to learn what they know, but sometimes what they don't know about a subject in history. And so for your visitors today, why is it important to tell the story of Harriet Tubman for this next generation?
That's another really good question. So first and foremost, regarding Harriet Tubman's life and legacy, we have to understand that Harriet Tubman, she's not an Underground Railroad hero. She's not an African American hero. She's an American hero. And the her contributions towards ideals of liberty and life, these are things that were held dear by the founding fathers, that in my opinion, just took a little while to catch up to everyone else. And she championed these ideas. She championed um, the right to freedom, the life for liberty for her friends and family members. And so first and foremost, I think that's the one thing that you really have to understand when looking into Harriet Tubman. Um, the other thing is that she is, in many respects, a, how should I say this, unremarkable, in the sense that she was just like many other African Americans during that time period in the 1800s. She couldn't read or write. Um, she was born enslaved, and she worked on a farm, and as well as various other places. just making a living for herself, for her family. Um, but even though on the face of things she was unremarkable, she was able to do some incredibly remarkable things. She made sure she learned from the free and enslaved people all around her, because those were some of the best tutors and teachers that she could possibly come across. She learned how to navigate the stars from free African American blackjacks who are African American watermen. She learned how to forage for food from people like her father, who was a master timber foreman and a free man. And she made sure, even though she wasn't educated in the sense that we would consider more of a formal education, she made sure to educate herself in all manner of different skills, and she was able to apply those skills when she escaped on the Underground Railroad. And it's in my opinion, those are the skills that allowed her to become one of the, if not the most successful Underground Railroad conductor in its history. And those two things come together, the fact that she was seemingly unremarkable, was able to do these amazing things, allowed her to elevate herself, her friends, her family members, and gain a lot of esteem in the eyes of very important people in the North, and solidified herself as an American hero.
Yeah, you're talking, it's really an inspiring story. And that I hope some of the young people who visit there, especially who think things like, how can I make a difference, in the world, come away really inspired and energized from learning about Harriet Tubman. And I think speaking about some of the outreach that you do there at the park, and surely some of that is to young people, what kind of outreach do you have going on there, and what are the different ways that you're connecting with members of the public?
So first and foremost, a lot of the things that we did, especially when I first joined up with the National Park Service, we do a lot of virtual presentations like this one. We create programs that are specifically tailored to a more virtual audience, because after the pandemic, I think we're sort of in the new world order, in a sense where things like this are becoming much more so the norm. So a lot of outreach virtually. We also have our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I'm also the social media coordinator for my park. So I create a lot of the social media posts to let people know about our programs, our events, so on and so forth, so people can can become acquainted with what we do, and find interest enough to come visit us. And staying along that line of virtual, we also do live streamed events. We live stream programs like this, and we also live stream events that we have at the park. And you can catch that on the on our Facebook page, and also our state park compatriots. They also live stream events. But bringing it back to something more personal, more one to one, we do have larger scale community events that we do. Our biggest one so far was our program on September 24th, entitled "From Spirituals to Blues and Gospel." That event was also live streamed, but we partnered with a local church, and we actually had that program in the church hall. And this was particularly important because Harriet Tubman was a deeply faithful person. She had a deep belief in she had a deep belief in her God, and she purported that that was a guiding light for her in her life. So we partner with people like that, and also other organizations like National Parks Conservation Association, the Chesapeake Conservancy, National Park Foundation. All these things to sort of to not just bring quality programs to the park, but bring it out to the public, into more public facing places, so people can not go too far out of their way to come see what we have to offer. And I say that because our park is about 20 minutes away from civilization. We're out here in the we like to say we're out here in the heart of Tubman country, but there's not a whole lot of of towns or stores or anything close by to us. So we try to take any opportunity that we can to bring our work out into the public.
Well, and before we wrap up today, I do want to ask you more about your social media outreach and how people can get in touch. So we will be returning to that in just a minute. But I think a natural follow-up there is for those not familiar with your park or its location or maybe even the Eastern Shore, how can someone visit the park? How do they get there? What can they expect?
Well, with any national park, before you visit, I really recommend you plan the visit beforehand. The easiest way to do that is through our park website. That is nps.gov/HATU. If you go to that website, then you'll see our hours of operation, what programs we're offering on that particular day, and other things that you can take part in, like our junior rangers and even the state parks park quest programs. So the best thing to do is go to sites like that to really plan out what you want to do. As far as where we're located in Dorchester County, Maryland, 4068 Golden Hill Road, Church Creek, Maryland. And the easiest way to get there is if you find just no one knows where Church Creek is. It's a very small town. But a lot of people know where Cambridge, Maryland is, and we're about 20 minutes from Cambridge.
Yeah, I can tell you have you're such an interesting storyteller. That I'd love to visit and talk more about you about the site. I'm curious on a bit of a personal follow up. As someone who grew up in the area, you probably heard about some of this history, maybe in a class or along the way, maybe not formalized in a college class and there was a state park there, as you said before. What is it like growing up in an area with such rich resources, historical resources, where for you it's kind of like home, but these are places of great national significance too. And I think as you got older, it occurred to you that these aren't just places where you grew up. These are places that belong to sort of all Americans. I think all Americans should be encouraged to visit and learn more about.
So I really like how you put that, something that all Americans can learn from and should be encouraged to go visit. That was a very salient point. Um, but as far as what was like for me growing up here, I have to say that regarding the Underground Railroad and early African American history, not a lot of that was discussed in high school, and even less so in college for me because I went the biology route. Um, but there's a lot of, I call them folk tales and word of mouth stories about Harriet Tubman, about William Still, about people like Jacob Jackson. And with anything that's orated over time, there tends to be some inaccuracies. So there's that, but that's a challenge that I really enjoy tackling here because part of my job, half of my job, is to sort of demystify a lot of the misconceptions regarding Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. And believe me when I tell you that the reality is usually far more impressive than the fictitious stories that get passed around. Um, but aside from school and that formal setting, um, I have to say when you're living amongst these really important resources, it's very easy um, for you to lose sight of that, for you to not interact with it in the way that you should, because when it's so close to you, you sort of can't see it. I think the saying is, you don't see the forest for the trees, or something of that to that effect. Um, and that's part of the reason why, like, it was an awakening for me uh, when came here as a seasonal ranger. I was uh, I was absorbing all of this amazing information and these incredible stories. And that was my first time really being um, really being privy to something like interpretation, where the point isn't just to tell a story, it's to create that emotional connection with the resource, because it's easy to say a fact, but it's much harder to get someone to care about the fact. So I think that's pretty much sums it up.
I mean, my hat is certainly off to you for the public service that you provide there, which is so important. And you know, I try to always conclude our podcasts with a kind of call to action for our audience. Tell our audience a little bit about how they can get involved, how they can learn more, whether social media, website, whatever it might be. For those where we're kind of leaving them with this information and they want to know more, what would you say to them?
So I'd say the easiest thing to do would be to follow our social media, take a look at our website. We have a plethora of information there. We have entire video series of content. We have book reviews from authors dealing with topics topics about the Underground Railroad. And also, like I mentioned, our social media gives you a lot of information regarding what we're doing, what we're planning on doing, and how you can be a part of that. But in a as far as a less immediate action you can take, the Underground Railroad is an amazing thing, and our park is called Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. It's not just about Harriet Tubman. Like it was mentioned before, this was a multi-state, multi-city movement where there are very safe houses and actors, agents, and so on and so forth. And it'd be a good idea for you to reach out to your own local historical society. Those places are absolute treasure troves of historical information, and they have some of the most dedicated workers and interpreters there that will really get you started if this is something that you're interested in. um, this video is going to be on the internet, and there's going to be people seeing it all over the world. I don't expect everyone to see it to be able to make their way to Church Creek, Maryland, but there's so many resources out there, and there's a historical society in just about every other town. So is that'd be a great place to start if you, for whatever reason, can't make it here and you want to be immersed in history, learn more, and act and do whatever you think is right to add to that.
And as you said earlier, I would imagine that, you know, spring is on its way, and I would imagine springtime's a beautiful time of the year to pay you a visit.
Absolutely, I could not agree more. It's not too hot, and we're out here in the Eastern Shore. We're surrounded by marshland, so when it's around the summertime, we start to get mosquitoes, but in the spring, it's really nice.
Well, I think that's a great place to end the conversation for today. But I just want to say thank you so much, Lawson Nwakudo, for being our guest today. Be sure to follow the ACHP on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube to keep up with the latest in historic preservation news. I'm Luke Nichter. Thank you for joining us on Preservation Perspectives.